So imagine you're in the middle of a heated argument with someone you care about. You can hear yourself talking, and it hits you that your tone is a bit over the top. A little voice in your head is saying, "Whoa, that's too much. They didn't do anything to deserve this." But even though you know it's not right for you to speak in such tone, you just can't help yourself and keep going. And honestly, none of this is about anything really important. Maybe it's a pan left in the sink or a reply that took ages. It can even be them saying, "Sure, whatever you want," in a way that rubs you the wrong way. And this isn't the first time you lost your cool this week. Remember Tuesday? You came home furious about work. Then there was your brother in a family group chat on Thursday, and whatever he said made you feel pretty small, and you're still annoyed about it. And now, here you are, arguing with someone you love over something very small. Every one of those moments felt totally justified to you. I'm not here to tell you otherwise. Your feelings are completely valid. But deep down, you want to break this vicious cycle. You want to end the toxicity between you and the people around you, and you have no clue where and how to start. So if you're someone who finds yourself in conflict quite often, and you've noticed your tone but couldn't stop it, this episode is for you. Welcome to Self-Full, the show where we dive into the stuff we do that we'd rather keep under wraps. My name is Wilson, and I'm getting real personal with this one. I've been that person who goes on and on trying to explain how everything around me, school, teachers, classmates, job, friends, and even family, was to blame for all of my problems. And I want to set the record straight about where this is headed. A lot of people might use topic like this to point fingers at you, but that's not what we're doing here. You're not in the wrong. What you're experiencing is just a typical human reaction, and you fell into it because it actually worked for you at some point. So here's the plan for today. First, we'll talk about what's really going on in those moments when you can hear yourself reacting but still can't stop. Then we'll figure out why it usually seems like it's someone else's fault. Lastly, I'll share some tips to help you get to the core reasons behind your reactions and express what you really want to say instead of letting your emotion take the wheel. So if you found yourself dealing with moments like this on a constant basis, stick around. This is where we turn these behaviors from just part of who you are into something you can actually work on. So let's be clear about what we're talking about here, because this can show up in a bunch of different ways, and some of them might seem totally unrelated. Some days, it's that harsh comment you made to your partner over something very small. Other times, you find yourself checking your phone over and over, waiting for them to reply, and reading those few little words in the other person's reply like they hold some huge secret. At work, you might find yourself really frustrated. You have a list of things that bugs you, and each one is spot on. And if you think about it, you probably experienced something similar at your previous job too. And then there's family. Someone brings up your sibling, and even before they can finish their sentence, your chest tightens up. Now, some of you might be thinking that none of this applies to you. You're the one who always says sorry first, agreeing with everyone and tries to keep things cool so no one else gets upset. But that's still a similar issue, just going the opposite way. We covered people pleasing in a previous episode, so if that sounds like you, feel free to go check that one out. But today, we're focusing on the type of reaction that can affect others in a much more direct way. The one where someone else feels the heat. And what makes this tricky to see from the inside is that every reaction comes with a valid reason. You're not just making excuses. And you've probably thought about this before and either decided that it's just who you are, like you've got a temper, you're jealous, or you're too sensitive, or you've blamed outside factors like your job, partner, or family. And I've leaned on both of those explanations for years. They're pretty easy to grab onto, but neither one really gives you a plan to work with when tomorrow comes around. So let's dig for something that can actually help. And first, we have to figure out what's really going on behind the scene, which leads us to point one. It went off before you did. If you think about it, you didn't actually decide to go off like that. It might not feel that way since it was your mouth and your voice doing the talking. But if you take a moment to really think back on it, you could hear yourself. Some part of you was watching it all unfold and wasn't on board with it while it was happening. So think about what that means. If the part of you talking and the part judging your words were the same, you wouldn't have been able to notice it happening. You would have stopped it immediately. The fact that you could hear it without intervening shows that there are actually two different systems at work within your brain, and one is moving way faster than the other. There's the observer and the doer, and one of those systems is a lot quicker. Deep down, there's a part of you that's always scanning for safety. It's asking one big question over and over again. Am I good with these people? Is my spot here secure? And this part is ancient, quick, and doesn't wait for your approval. It runs beneath your conscious thought because thinking takes time. Throughout most of human history, by the time you figure out if your group still wants you around, it was already too late to do anything about it. So when this part of you senses a threat, and I mean senses, not figure things out, it doesn't reason. It doesn't just send you a notification and wait for a response. It jumps into action. It gets your voice ready and prep a sharp response, then handed the whole reaction to you already in motion. And that's what the observer side of you were hearing. You weren't losing control. You were just catching up to something that had already kicked off. Notice how complete the reaction is by the time you are aware of it? That's your clue. When you say something sharp, the words just flow. The example pops up in your head quickly, the stuff they always do, the issue from 3 weeks ago that you thought it was settled. No one can put together an argument that fast, lightning fast, because it was already packed away, just in case you needed it. This is a protection system at work. Just be careful with the word protection here because it sounds like a nice thing to have, but this isn't gentle at all. It's kind of like an airbag in a car. And think about it. An airbag is there to save your life, but it goes off faster than you can blink. It never asks for your permission to go off. It just does when there's a trigger for it to deploy. And the impact force might hurt you and the person next to you. That's not a mistake. That's just how it was designed. So how do you catch something that's quicker than you? Actually, you don't. Not in the heat of the moment. I want to be clear about this because a lot of advice is just a variation of close your eyes and count to 10. And honestly, if any of that had worked, you probably wouldn't be listening to this episode right now. Instead, you catch it after the fact. And here's your first tool. Check the size. The idea is simple. Later, whether that night or the next morning or whenever it's quiet, put two things side by side. What actually happened and how big your reaction was. And this isn't about scoring yourself. It's about observing what went down. For example, if the issue was a pan in a sink, this may be a 2 out of 10 in a scale of importance, but your reaction was probably an 8 out of 10. Recognizing that an 8 to a 2 isn't about you being a bad person. It's more like your airbag going off when you drove over a speed bump. And that gap between the 2 and the 8 is what we're focusing on. Because the difference between those two numbers didn't come from the dirty pan in the sink. It was already in you before the argument happened. And the size of the gap shows you how much of that reaction wasn't really about what just happened. And one crucial rule before you dive into this, don't use it as a scoring system. You're not trying to build a case against yourself here. If you catch yourself thinking, I overreacted, I am awful, I am such a bad person for saying something like that, just stop right there and come back to it another day. The point is just measuring the gap, not judging yourself. Let me show you what that looks like in a scenario. Say it's Sunday night, you and your husband are in the kitchen, dinner's finished, and there are some dirty dishes still sitting in the sink because he said he'd get to it. And you found yourself saying something about the dishes still sitting there, and the word came out with an edge on it that neither of you were expecting. And he turned around and go, it's just dishes. Why are you freaking out about it? And yeah, that reply does sting, but deep down, you also know that he's right about these dirty dishes are not that big of a deal. And you notice it while it was happening, but still you replied back with something else anyway that led to a fierce argument. And now it's an hour later, he's in the other room watching something on TV. You're sitting on the edge of your bed and the shame has shown up and it's doing its usual laps. But this time, instead of following the laps down to a spiral, you do the other thing. You put the two side by side, the dishes in the sink and your own voice earlier. And then you notice that the gap between them is enormous. It isn't even close. And for the first time, that gap is interesting instead of just embarrassing. Because a gap that size means something was already loaded before you even walked into that kitchen. And you don't know what it was yet, but that's fine. Tonight, you just found out there was something else, and you keep that in your mental note. So why does looking at the size do anything when it's hour too late to help anyway? You might be asking, what's the point of this tool? And the point is awareness. Because you're not trying to stop the airbag. You're trying to find out that you have one and set yourself up to dig deeper into what triggers it. And you can't do that while the airbag is deploying. When that's happening, there is no you available. There's just the reaction and the reason. Afterwards is the only window that exists, and afterward is a real window, and nobody ever tells you to use it. They tell you to control yourself in the moment, and that's just shoving down more pressure on top of the already existing one. And you and I both know that's not exactly healthy for you. And this tool doesn't stop the next argument. You're probably going to have another one next week, but that is not the tool failing. Awareness is the entire job at this stage, and it's a much bigger job than it sounds. And I want to share where I learned to notice that gap. I didn't actively search for it. Actually, someone pointed out to me. A few years back, I was having a tough time at work, and one Sunday or Saturday afternoon, my wife asked a simple question about what we were doing that evening. It was just a regular logistic question, nothing more. But my answer was way over the top for what she asked, and she just stopped and looked at me. She didn't argue, she just said, "That was a lot." And when I heard that, those few words hit hard. And I did what I always do and started explaining. I told her I was tired and that it had been a long week for me, which was true, but it wasn't really the answer, you know what I mean? And later that night, I couldn't stop myself thinking that she had merely asked about what we wanted to do that evening, and yet I reacted as if she had accused me of something. I mean, there was no reason for me to react the way I did. Her question was a simple one, and my response was totally out of proportion. Nothing in that room could explain it, which meant I had already brought my own issue into the mix. So that's the first point. These reactions are quick, protective, and prepackaged. But here's the weird part that's still hanging in the air. In the moment, I didn't feel any of that. I just saw myself as a reasonable person reacting to an annoying situation. So where does that come from? Which leads us to point 2. The reason shows up second. We all tend to think that we have our reasons ready to go, which is why we reacted the way we do. But actually, it's the opposite. Our reactions come first, and then we come up with reasons afterwards. It can feel like a straightforward process, like you notice something, you think about it, and respond. But remember, reactions happen way quicker than our thoughts, so most of the time, our reasons can't possibly come before them. There just isn't enough time. What happens is that your mind walks into a situation where something had already happened, and its job is to explain what it's witnessing. It does this instantly and convincingly. Here's the key point. When the explanation points outward, it blames the outside factors like other people, the situation, or anything external, never what's really going on inside. This doesn't mean that you're being dishonest. It's just that the explanation isn't meant to be true. It's there to make sense of what just happened. So when you catch yourself saying, "I reacted that way because they always do this," that's not a lie or an excuse. It's more like a caption you come up with after the fact. And a caption can perfectly describe what's in the picture, but still not reveal why that picture was taken in the first place. This gets tricky because a lot of those captions are actually spot on. Your job might truly involve long hours. Your brother might really be the favorite among your parents, and your partner may have honestly been glued to their phone all night. Every single one of these are a valid point. So you can't really test a caption by asking if it's true, because it will always hold up. But that also means trying to evaluate each one individually is a waste of your time. It doesn't tell you what's the real underlying factor behind every single argument. So how do you find out why these things bother you so? I mean, the real reason behind them. How do you start looking inwards and find the real reason behind why you tend to react the way you did? And here's your second tool. Line up the week. So once a week, I think Sunday night is a good choice, but anytime works. You jot down everything that genuinely bothered you over the past 7 days. Not just the big stuff, but all of it, especially those small, petty, embarrassing moments. Stick to about 4 or 5 lines and each about 10 words. You don't necessarily have to go into excruciating detail. And after you write them down, read them as a list instead of going through them one at a time. When you look at them individually, each one comes with its own airtight reason. That's the trick our minds play. But when you line them up, those reasons aren't as powerful anymore. You'll notice something important. They all happen to you in the same week, and that's the common thread. Then ask one question about the entire list. Don't ask, "Was I right?" because you probably were, which is part of the issue. Instead, ask, what is the common theme in this list? You'll often find that the same underlying thoughts pops up across several entries. Not the same event, but the same feeling. Before I explain further, let me show you an example. Let's say it's a Thursday and you're sitting in a work meeting Everything seems to be going fine, and then your manager gives a shout out to someone on your team praising the work they did last week. No one mentions you, and nobody criticizes you. Someone earned a compliment, and they deserve it. But then, your face gives away a reaction you quickly try to hide. And the rest of the day feels a little off. And by that evening, you've created this whole story in your head about how you've been completely overlooked at work for months. And suddenly, you're thinking it might be time to start looking for a new gig. And then Sunday comes along, and you decided to make a list. You jot down that meeting along with 4 other things that made you feel a bit negative that week. And when you read all 5 of them together, the story about feeling overlooked at work starts to fall apart. But you notice there's a feeling of similarity showing up with the other 4 issues that you have with your brother, with your partner, and even with a friend who took 2 days to get back to you. And none of those issues are related to each other except for one common thing: insecurity. You've come to realize that deep down, you feel insecure about a bunch of things in your life. You feel insecure about not getting recognized for what you contribute at work. You feel insecure about your brother not giving you enough credit for everything you've done for the family. You feel insecure about your partner not putting enough effort to help raise the kids. And you feel insecure about your friend not being there for you when you need them. It's only when you line up the week and look at your list from a broader perspective that you can really see your insecurity for what they are. And from that point, you can start thinking about how to deal with them. So why does the list work better than just reacting to one thing at a time? Because you can argue about a single point. Each one has its own defense, and those defenses are typically pretty solid. You'd probably back them up yourself. But when you got 5 or more points back to back, they usually don't hold up as well. It's not that any of them are wrong. It's just that each requires a different explanation. If someone has 5 unrelated complaints in a week, that starts to feel like more than just bad luck. The pattern and the underlying reason starts to surface. You're not trying to find reasons to be mistaken. You want to uncover the reasons for disagreement. That's the beauty of a list. It puts everything together and allows them to contradict each other and filter out the noise until a real reason behind it pops up, which won't happen if you're only dealing with one at a time. So now you can see the difference between the size of what happened and the size of your reaction. And you can put weeks of them in a row and watch the real underlying reason surface, which is useful, and it is also on its own completely useless. Because everything so far has happened in your own head, hours after the argument, and whoever was in the argument with you doesn't have any of it. They just got whatever you dished out at them. So the last question is the one that actually matters. What do you do about the damage? Which leads us to point 3. Go back and make it smaller. So let's dive into the idea of who's footing the bill in this situation, because believe me, someone always is. When an airbag deploys, something or someone has to take that hit, and it's never whatever caused it to go off. It's usually the person right next to you. The passenger didn't make it happen. They just happened to be there. Now, that's the first cost you can see, because you can see the expression on their face. But here's the second cost, the one that often goes unnoticed. What you do to protect yourself from your worst fear often ends up bringing your worst fear to life. This idea runs through every example we've talked about. If you're worried that your partner is pulling away, you might start checking up on them all the time and getting anxious when they take too long to respond. That constant management can be draining for the other person, and they end up drifting further away. If you think you're not cutting it at work, you might just start blaming the job itself, the coworker, and the work environment, and you eventually stop caring. As a result, you'll never find out what you could have achieved there. Or if you feel like your family gives someone else in the family more love or care, you might start to hold that little bit of grudge, and thus comes off as a bit cold when you talk to your family. And after a few years, they might start calling you less. They start to drift apart from you because in their mind, they simply don't want to deal with your attitude. And now your fear seems validated. It doesn't just affect the people around you. It also reinforces your fear. That's why this is so important to tackle. So what should you do? And here's the third tool. Say the smaller thing. The idea is simple. Within a day or so, after you have found out what's your real underlying reason of that previous argument, go back to the person who you had snapped to and explain what it was really about. This isn't an apology. You might have already done that. And just so you know, apologies are not the same as saying the smaller thing. Saying, "I'm sorry I snapped," fixes the immediate issue but does nothing for the long run. It closes off the conversation without actually explaining anything. The smaller thing is about getting to the heart of what you're feeling underneath. So instead of saying, sorry, I was in a mood, you might say, that wasn't really about the thing we were arguing. I've been feeling like I'm falling behind everyone else lately and I took it out on you. And that's it. Just a couple of sentences. Notice how much simpler and less dramatic that is compared to what you originally said. And that's the whole point. The loud version is big and defensive, and the smaller thing is just straightforward. There are two key things to make this work. First, say it flat. Don't turn it into a performance or speak with a quiver in your voice asking for sympathy. If you deliver it like you need a rescue, it changes the whole vibe, and they'll pick up on that. Just state it like you're sharing a fact. It's just information. Second, don't add anything at the end, especially do not follow up with any sort of request, like, could you maybe reply a bit faster next time? The moment you attach a request, it turns from honesty into a negotiation, putting them under pressure, which is exactly what you wanted to avoid in the first place. Let me show you an example. So, picture this. Imagine there was a group chat with your family last week, and your mom mentioned something about your brother had done, and you reply with something that was technically a joke and definitely not one. And nobody said anything. The chat just moved on, which is somehow worse. Now it's a few days later and you're driving, and you call your brother. Not to sort out the joke. You've already decided that you're not going to bring up the joke at all, because the joke isn't what the call is about. And after the normal talking, you say it. Hey, that joke I made in that chat a few days ago, that wasn't about you. I've had this thing for years where I assumed everyone rates you higher than me, and it comes out sideways sometimes. And there's a pause on the phone because that's not a normal sentence for the two of you. And then he says, dude, I've spent my whole life thinking that about you. And you're both quiet for a second. And then you talk about something else entirely because neither of you knows what to do with it. But something in that phone call is different now, and it stays different. The knot in you and your brother's stomach has been untied. So why does the smaller thing work when an apology doesn't? Two reasons. The first is that an apology is about the surface. The tone, the volume, and the words you choose are not really the main issue. Apologizing just for the tone without addressing what's really going on is like paying for a broken nose while ignoring the fact that the airbag went off over a speed bump. It might calm things down for the evening, but it doesn't fix anything for next time. And here's the bigger picture. Both the loud and the smaller version are after the same thing. They both want to know that you still matter to the other person. The loud version makes it fuzz until it gets a reaction, while the smaller version just asks for reassurance. Unfortunately, only one of these usually gets a response because no one can provide comfort over a complaint, especially over something small and petty. That's the issue summed up in one sentence. The protective approach is just a clumsy way of asking for what you need. When you express your need directly, it doesn't need that kind of protection. Now, I can guess what you might be wondering next. What if they don't take it well? And that's a real concern, and I won't pretend it isn't. You might say what you need quietly and get a reply like, yeah, well, you've been doing that for years, or maybe get nothing, or just a shrug. But here's the truth. Their reaction isn't the main point of what you're doing. You didn't speak up just to be forgiven. If that was your goal, you'd only be giving them another thing to deal with. You spoke up to bring the real issue into the open, something that's never really been acknowledged before, and the loud version wouldn't have accomplished that. This truth comes out whether or not they know how to handle it. If they're still hurt, that's not about you. It's information about how much has built up over time. And knowing that is important, and it's something the loud version would have kept from you for good. And one more thing about all of this, because it's really the main point of this episode. You are not broken, and you are never the bad guy in your own story. There's a part of you that's been working really hard for a long time to keep you safe around people. It's been doing that since before you even knew that you can make that choice. And it has just been using the tools it has. The goal isn't to shut that part down. You can't, and honestly, you wouldn't want to, because that part is also what picks up on when someone you care about goes quiet. The goal here is way simpler. It's about not letting that part of you do all the talking anymore, and instead saying what it actually wants to say. And I'll be real about the first time I did this, and honestly, I put it off longer than I should have. This was the same Saturday I mentioned earlier, the one where I freaked out over an evening question like it was an accusation. That night, I did apologize. I'm pretty good at that. I've had a lot of practice. And it worked, like it always does. By bedtime, me and my wife were cool. But on Tuesday, when I finally said the other thing, it took me 3 whole days to get there. I even rehearsed it in my own head, which is kind of pointless. I said, Saturday wasn't really about what we should do. I've been feeling totally useless at work for about a month and I haven't said it out loud to anyone, including you. And she just looked at me and said, I know. That was not the response I was expecting at all. I had planned for her to be surprised, but it turns out that she had known for weeks. She was just waiting for me to say it because there's really nothing anyone can do when someone's having a tough month until they admit it first. What sticks with me is that it wasn't news to her. The only one in that house who didn't know was me. So now let's do a quick recap. Let's put these 3 tools together in one motion. It goes like this. When an argument happened over something that feels like a 2 out of 10 and you freaked out with an 8, you hear yourself doing it and just can't stop. That's like the airbag kicking in. Later on, when things calm down, you take a moment to use the first tool. Compare the things you were arguing about to the level of your reaction and see how big that gap is. This shows how much more energy, how much more anger you brought into the situation. And it tells you that there's a real reason behind why you snapped. Then you look back at your week and make a list of all the negative things that happened. There's always a common thing behind all of them that makes sense. And that's what the second tool does. It brings out the real underlying reason why you feel the way you do. It could be insecurity, embarrassment, fear of being treated unfairly. These are the type of common things that you're looking for. And after that, you go back to the person you were engaged in an argument with and you'll share the small things. Not an apology, but give them the real truth that you found out from the first 2 tools. You'll probably not get it right the first time. You'll probably look at that gap and start blaming yourself. And when you say the smaller thing, you might end up over-explaining it. None of that is a fail, by the way. The more you practice, the easier it gets. And remember where we begin? You're standing there in the kitchen. You can hear your own voice, but you have no power to stop it. Here's what you probably think I'm going to say, that the goal is to never do that again. And let me tell you, that is not it. You're definitely going to do it again, probably within this week. The point of this episode, as with any of my past and future episodes of this podcast, is self-awareness. Understanding the real reasons behind why you feel, experience, speak, and act the way you do. Not looking at yourself like there's something wrong with you, not forcing yourself to stop feeling or acting the way you do, but finding out what emotional needs you might be missing that triggers all of your actions. After all, what is shouting, arguing, silent treatment, sarcasm, and all the action that are driven by negative emotions, if not a form of self-defense to protect your emotional needs, if not a form of request for respecting your emotional needs? It's just that most of us don't even realize that our emotional needs are under threat, and we end up blindly driven by our emotions. Only through self-awareness can we look under our own hood and find the real problem, and from there, plan a way to fulfill our own emotional needs without hurting anyone around us. You don't need to become someone who never overreacts. You just need to get better at saying what's really underneath that reaction. The weird part is, the more you say the true stuff out loud, the less often that loud version has to come out for you. So if any of this episode has resonated with you, send this one to the person who tend to react more fiercely. You know exactly who I'm talking about. And if you do try the smaller thing this week, I'd love to hear how they respond. You can find me on Instagram at Selfful Podcast or drop me a comment on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. And remember, you are not broken, and I'm always here for you. Take care.